Okay, so we're going to look at conditionally rendering these buttons and also dealing with the host information inside our activities. And we're going to need some additional properties to track this information in our activities that we store on the client side. And we can get that information from the activity attendees list along with the host username. So we'll go back to VS Code. And what we'll do first of all is we'll open up the activity interface once again. And what we're going to do is we're going to add some additional properties inside here. So we're going to want to know if a user is going to the event, for instance. And again, for the time being, we're going to make these optional so that we don't break other parts of our application whilst we're building this. We're also going to add an isHost flag. And again, this is going to be a Boolean. And what we'll also add is a host property, which is going to be a profile. And what we'll do when we set the activities that we receive from our API, then we'll use the host username so that we can populate a profile object inside the activity as well. And it's just going to make our life easier when we display this information on our user interface. So what we'll do is we'll go to our activity store and we'll set these properties when we receive the activity from our API. And we already have a method inside here to set activity properties. So we'll make use of this so that when we do call this particular method, either in the load activity or in the load activities, then we can add some additional information and populate those other properties inside our activity. So what we'll do, first of all, is we'll get a reference to our user object from our user store. So we'll say const user, and we'll say store.userStore, and we'll need to bring in store into our imports, and then we'll get the userStore.user. Now our user could be a user, or if they're not logged in, this is going to be set to null. Now we don't let our users display our activities unless they're authenticated. So what we'll do is we'll check to see if we have the user object. So we'll say if user, and we will, of course, have the user at this point, because if we're executing this function, then they've gone to load the activities, and they can only do that if they're actually logged into our application. So what we'll do, we'll say activity.isGoing, and we're going to set this equal to the activity.attendees, and we'll need to keep using that exclamation mark for now. And we'll say sum, and inside here, we'll say a goes to a.username is equal to user.username. And what this sum function returns to us is a Boolean if the callback function returns true for any element of the array. So if a user is going to an event, as in they are in that attendees list, then we flag this as, yep, they are going. What we'll do then is we'll set the host property. So we'll say activity.isHost, and we'll set this to equal to activity.hostUsername equal to user.username, and then we'll set the activity.host property equal to activity.attendees.find, and we'll say x goes to x.username equal to activity.hostUsername, and the rest of these properties stay the same. So what we'll do is we'll check this is working, and we'll go to our activity list item to do this so that we can see this in our user interface. And let's take a look. So we've got the host information in the item description here. So what we should be able to do now is add our expression and say activity.host.displayName, and make sure we've got the optional chaining here because the host may or may not be set according to TypeScript. So if we didn't have the optional chaining operator there, we would get an error saying that that could be null, and we're just saying, yep, we're aware of this, but we're okay with that, and we're just simply making the display name optional. And then what we'll do is we'll add a label on the activity list item to inform the user if they're the host or they are going to an activity. So what we'll do is we'll say activity.isHost double ampersand, and then inside here we're going to add another item.description, and inside here we're going to add a label and we'll make it basic. We'll give it a color equal to orange. And inside the label, we'll say you are hosting this activity. And then we'll just copy this and we'll paste it below. And what we'll check for is the user and say activity is going, and they're not the activity.isHost, another double ampersand, and we'll change the color to green, and we'll just say you are going to this activity. And if we take a look right now, let's take a look and see if we can see this in our activity list. And we'll go into our activities, and we can see that Bob is hosting activity 1 and activity 2, not going to future activity 1, hosting activity 2, but is going to future activity 3. So that appears to be working. And what we'll also do is update our activity detailed header so that we only display the buttons that are relevant to that particular user for that particular activity. So let's head back to VS Code once again, and we'll go to our activity detailed header this time. And we want to take a look at our buttons inside here. So what we'll do, just above the first button, we'll check to see if the activity.isHost, and we'll add a ternary. And we'll cut our manage event button and we'll put it inside there. And after this, we'll add a colon, and then we'll say activity.isGoing, and we'll add another ternary, open parentheses, and if they are going, then we'll give them the option to cancel attendance. And we'll add a colon, and this means they're not going, and we'll cut this and paste it in, and we'll give them the option to join an activity. And what we should find, let's just reformat things inside here. And what we should find now is that if we go and take a look, we should see that on this particular activity, if I just refresh the page, then we've got Bob. I'm logged in as Bob. Bob is on the attendance list, and we've got the option to cancel attendance. If we go back to the activities, and let's pick one I'm not going to, the future activity 1, and click on view. Then Tom and Jane are going, and I've got the option to join the activity. And if we go back to our activities and click on view, then I've got the option to manage the event for an activity I'm hosting. And we just need to update the information on the right hand side here. So let's go back to VS Code. And what we'll do is go back to our activity detailed sidebar. Now, what we'll do here actually is instead of using attendees, we're actually going to pass down the activity to this component. So we'll say activity is type of activity, and then we'll say activity, and we'll destructure what we're looking for inside this, and we want our attendees, and we want the information about the host inside here. And we can remove profile from the imports here. Now we're getting warnings from our attendees here. So again, just for the short term, we'll say if !attendees before we return, as in we don't have any attendees, then we're just going to return null, which will save us updating each of these attendees properties. And then what we can do is where we're displaying this label, just inside here, we can say attendee.username is equal to host.username and double ampersand, and just add the closing curly bracket after the label here. And let's try reformatting things again. And then we just need to go to our activity details again and swap attendees for activity and remove the attendees from this. And what we should find, if we go back to our browser again, we should have a more accurate host information on the right hand side. There's only one attendee of this, so let's go back to our activities and pick one where there's a few people going. Let's pick this future activity 1, and we should find that Tom is the host and Jane is an attendee, so it doesn't have the host flag. And of course this activity is not hosted by Bob, so we'll just go back to the activity detailed header and update that property as well. And where we've got the hard-coded Bob inside here, what we can do now is say hosted by activity.host.displayname. And what we could do actually is put this inside a link. So we'll add a link that we get from React Router, and we'll say 2 equals, add the curly brackets, the backticks, /profiles, $, and then we'll say activity.host.username. And what we'll do is we'll take the contents that we just created inside the strong tag and we'll put it inside the link as the text there. And if we go and check, what we should find is that we can see it's hosted by Tom. And if we click on this, we would go to Tom's profile, but we don't have that yet. So now we've got the user interface elements in place, let's deal with the functionality, and we'll take a look at doing that next.